How will Jon Snow be resurrected in the books? Will it be the same as on the show, or very different? And what might these differences mean for the plot and Jon's character going forward? Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to In Deep Geek. On this channel we dive deep into the world of A Song of Ice and Fire, as well as The Lord of the Rings and The Witcher. Welcome. On the TV show, Jon's resurrection was one of the most memorable moments of Season 6. Davos took control of Jon's body after his murder, called on Melisandre, who was in the middle of a crisis of faith, having arrived fresh from Stannis' death, got her to perform the last kiss on him, or the show's equivalent of it, and, although it didn't seem to work at first, and the loyal Night's Watchmen gathered their strength to attack and the wildlings gathered to oppose it, Jon was resurrected, left the Night's Watch, and carried on with his plot, apparently unaffected in the long term by his experiences. He was perhaps a bit more morose, but seemingly largely unchanged in character or in what he would have done had he not been killed. That series of events won't happen in the books, not least because the situation in Castle Black is very different. Davos, who masterminded the whole resurrection plot in the show, isn't there. He was last seen in the books in White Harbour, apparently about to head off to Skagos in search of Rickon, hundreds of miles away. Melisandre is not in the middle of a crisis of faith because Stannis is still very much alive. The wildlings' loyalties are incredibly varied, as are the Night's Watch who are there. Queen Selyse is there, as is Shireen, as are the Queen's men, Stannis' soldiers who have converted to the faith of R'hllor. Also heading that way are Tycho Nestoris, Jane Poole, who most people still think is Arya, and plenty of others. There's Val, the wildling princess locked in a tower, a complicated baby swap plot, debates about who, if anyone, should go to Hardhome to rescue the thousands trapped there, a skin changer whose wild boar really doesn't get on with Ghost, and many, many more subplots. Basically, Castle Black is a complicated political situation. And Jon's murder is also more complicated and messy than on the show. The killers were an ad hoc collection of Night's Watchmen reacting against his announcement that he would be abandoning the Wall to attack Winterfell. The grudges and righteous anger against Jon for breaking one Night's Watch tradition or rule after another had been there for a while, and to be clear, he had been the most radical Lord Commander imaginable, letting the wildlings through the Wall, handing over control of Night's Watch property to Stannis and even the wildlings. But the actual attack seems to have been spontaneous rather than planned out. Jon announced his abandonment of his vows to the Night's Watch, the hall erupted, he went outside, and was killed. The whole situation was pandemonium. One the Giant was on the verge of rampage. One of Jon's assassins was crying as he stabbed him, so distraught was he with what was going on. Here's the description in the books of how the assassination actually happens. Jon has emerged from the hall to find One going crazy. Jon was trying to calm him and the situation, knowing that swords would only enrage the Giant even more. "No blades!" he screamed. "Wick, put that knife away," he meant to say. When Will Whittlestick slashed at his throat, the word turned into a grunt. Jon twisted from the knife, just enough so it barely grazed his skin. "He cut me." When he put his hand to the side of his neck, blood welled between his fingers. "Why?" "For the watch." Wick slashed at him again. This time, Jon caught his wrist and bent his arm back until he dropped the dagger. The gangling steward backed away, his hand upraised as if to say, "Not me. It was not me." Men were screaming. Jon reached for Longclaw, but his fingers had grown stiff and clumsy. Somehow he could not seem to get the sword free of its scabbard. Then Bowen Marsh stood there before him, tears running down his cheeks. "For the watch." He punched Jon in the belly. When he pulled his hand away, the dagger stayed where he had buried it. Jon fell to his knees. He found the dagger's hilt and wrenched it free. In the cold night air, the wound was smoking. "Ghost," he whispered. Pain washed over him. "Stick them with the pointy end." When the third dagger took him between the shoulder blades, he gave a grunt and fell face first into the snow. He never felt the fourth knife, only the cold. We don't see what happens then because this is obviously from Jon's point of view, and that ends when he ends. We don't know how people react to his death or even the identity of all the people who stabbed him. Beyond that, we're also left with the question of what happens to his body. He obviously can't come back if he doesn't have a body to come back to. As we've seen, the situation is busy, raucous and complicated. There are lots of different groups, each of which have different aims and objectives, and with Jon gone, no one will be clearly in control. Whoever does end up in charge will be faced with the big issue of what to do with Jon's body, and who is to be in charge of the Night's Watch now. The Night's Watch loyalists who just murdered Jon will obviously want to decide on both of those things, but what about the wildlings who had just declared that they would follow Jon to Winterfell? They'll have opinions about the people who killed him, to put it mildly. And Stannis' men? Surely the self-styled king will want to know about this, and then there's Melisandre and the Queen's men. The first thing will be to prevent a bloodbath. I suspect that there will be more casualties before the night is out, but a tense order will be restored. Then everyone will be standing around trying to figure out what to do with Jon's body. They can't just leave it. Everyone knows about the threat from the White Walkers. They don't want Jon coming back as an Ice White, but burning it seems very final. What if Stannis would want to gift it back to the Starks? The Starks care a lot about what happens to their dead, and they don't burn them. And Melisandre by now knows that Jon is important, and will surely at least know theoretically that Fire Whites are impossible. In the absence of a clear decision-maker, surely the most likely answer is that his body would be put in the ice cells. The ice cells are pretty much what they sound like, prison cells literally carved into the ice of the wall. Coincidentally, or probably not coincidentally, we are reminded of their existence in this very chapter. Before he received the pink letter, Jon went to inspect them, and he had used them not just to house live prisoners, but also dead Night's Watchmen. He had been concerned that they might be raised as Ice Whites, and so he had them placed in the ice cells and chained to the walls. In other words, George R. R. Martin reminds us in this very chapter that the bodies of dead Night's Watchmen can be safely stored in the ice cells. So it makes sense that Jon's body be stored there. And there is actually quite a lot of foreshadowing that this might be the case. Just to pull a few quick examples out, when Jon was briefly imprisoned in the ice cells in A Storm of Swords, Alliser Thorne tells him that he will die in there, and we're told Jon believed him. Another time, Jon visited a prisoner there. The door hinges apparently screamed like damned souls, and when Jon went in, he could see his own reflection in there. One time when passing through the tunnel through the wall, Jon experiences it like a tomb. This is all very symbolic language. Elsewhere, Bran has a dream of Jon sleeping alone in a cold bed, his skin growing pale and hard as all memory of warmth fled from him. I don't know about you, but that sounds to me like a body freezing. So it seems that Jon's body will be preserved, frozen in the ice cells. But what about his spirit or soul or essence or whatever it is? Where does that go? Well, let's go back to the prologue to A Dance with Dragons, the book in which Jon dies, which is from the point of view of Varamir Sixskins, a powerful wildling skin changer. George R. R. Martin uses these prologues from apparently random point-of-view characters to introduce concepts or themes that will be developed in that book. And this time, it's all about skin changing, and specifically how to survive death if you're a skin changer. We learn that skin changers have a so-called second life in their bonded animal after the death of their own body. It's actually quite natural for them, something they don't have to particularly prepare for. You can just do it. Varamir's biggest concern is where he might put his spirit, not whether he'll be able to do it. Earlier on in the story, Varamir even thought about a second life inside Ghost. It would be, he thought, a second life worthy of a king. Foreshadowing. And Orrel, the guy with the eagle, lives on in his eagle when he dies. And although Jon might not have been taught all of this, he seems to instinctively understand it. Thinking that Bran and Rickon are dead, he twice wonders whether they, or parts of them, are living on in their direwolves. Even Melisandre sees the link. In her flames, she sees Jon interchangeably as a man and then a wolf, surrounded by skulls, obviously symbolising death. Melisandre might not be particularly good at interpreting her visions, but I think that symbolism is pretty obvious to us. So if Jon can technically transfer his soul into Ghost, if he thinks that's probably what happens to his siblings and therefore him when they die, if doing it doesn't take any great planning or ritual, that all makes sense. But is there any evidence that this actually happened? Well, yes. The last thing Jon does before he dies is call out to Ghost, and he thinks, stick them with the pointy end, an in-joke between him and Arya, one of his siblings. So he's thinking about his Stark heritage, his siblings who he thinks will live on through their direwolves, and he's calling out to his own direwolf. And then he feels cold. Compare this to Varamir's experience when he dies and goes into his wolf. His last thought is of his wolf, and then he felt a shock of cold, as if plunged into icy waters, exactly the same as what Jon experienced. As if to underline the link here, Varamir even sees a sleeping direwolf who growls at him as he searches for his own wolf. It seems clear. Jon is going to skin change into ghost when he dies. So far, I think most of this is a pretty straightforward analysis of the situation we have in the books. It makes sense for Jon's body to be placed in the ice cells, and his spirit will naturally go to ghost. The harder question is how he will return. How will his spirit and body reunite? Well, perhaps we will get some kind of a version of what happened on the TV show, in that Melisandre might try to do the last kiss on Jon, like Thoros did for Beric, and we know that can work, and her powers are apparently even stronger at the Wall, so perhaps. But a significant number of Night's Watchmen won't want her to do that. And while everyone is arguing, and until a new Lord Commander is elected, and in the absence of Stannis, the ice cells seems most likely, which means that however his spirit returns to his body will need to be defrosted first. Again, maybe Melisandre can do that in some way, but I want to draw your attention to two things that we know will soon happen at Castle Black. First, at some point, we don't know exactly when, Jane Poole will arrive at Castle Black, and everyone there will think she is Arya Stark. In the pre-released Theon chapter from the Winds of Winter, Stannis sends her up to the Wall as a gift to Jon. You might wonder why she would keep up the pretense that she is Arya once she is out of Ramsay's clutches, but she has been abused and brainwashed almost as much as Theon, and Theon himself had begged her to keep up the act to protect herself. As Arya, she has value as a political prisoner. As Jane, she doesn't. So when she arrives at Castle Black as Arya Stark, and people still don't know what to do with Jon's body, it makes sense that they should ask her what to do with it. If anyone has the right to decide, it's a Stark. And what would she say? Well, I don't know, but there has to be a chance that she would give in to the pressure to burn it, or let Melisandre thaw it out and try and bring him back. So that's the first thing we know will happen. The second is Melisandre burning Shireen. This was confirmed to be one of 3 WTF moments that George R.R. Martin told to the showrunners during their epic handover meeting with him. It will happen in the books. The way they did it on the show had Melisandre do it to get rid of the snow to allow Stannis to attack Winterfell. And Stannis' situation is even more dire in the books. Winter has fallen so hard around Winterfell that his army has ground to a halt. His men are dying every day from the cold. They are having to eat their own horses. They will literally freeze to death in a few days unless something changes. Melisandre will find this out. If she doesn't see it in the flames, she will soon hear about it from Jane and the guards escorting her, and she will know that she needs to do some pretty big magic. And she's been pretty consistent that that means Kingsblood. Her first thought will be Mance Rayder's child, as Mance was the king beyond the wall, but Jon did that baby swap, so that child is now safely down in Old Town. Well, safe-ish in Old Town. So who is left? Shireen is Stannis' heir, and Melisandre would certainly get support from some of the wildlings for killing someone with grayscale. Val, for example, has already told Jon that Shireen is unclean and should be killed. So we have the possibility that Melisandre might burn Shireen on a huge pyre at Castle Black right at the same time a decision is made to burn those bodies in the ice cells, including Jon. Now fake Arya has perhaps given the go-ahead. And imagine now Melisandre chanting over the flames of all of these bodies about saving Azor Ahai reborn. Keep hold of that image, because it will get even more dramatic in a moment. But whether or not George R. R. Martin goes down that route, Jon's body will be defrosted somehow, and his spirit will return to his body. On my live streams over on IDG Live, people have often asked how might Jon's spirit return to his body. The truth is, there are several ways it might happen. Perhaps Jon will go back of his own accord when his body is back up and running. We saw Varamir in control of where his spirit went after all. Or perhaps a powerful skin changer could push Jon out of Ghost and back into his own body. Again, we're told that Varamir pushed his master Hagon out of his wolf when Hagon was enjoying his second life there, so it's possible. Bloodraven clearly has an active interest in keeping Jon alive, seemingly believing him to be the prince that was promised, and when in doubt, always blame Bloodraven. Or perhaps it will simply be something inexplicable, wrought through Melisandre's magic, and we won't get a clear explanation. The first time Thoros brought Beric back, it wasn't what he attempted or was expecting, and George R. R. Martin described Dany hatching her dragon eggs as unique, magical, wondrous, a miracle. Not something he wanted to explain the mechanics of. So this is how I would do it, if I were writing the story. I don't think George R. R. Martin will necessarily do it exactly like this, but given the foreshadowing and story setup, I'd be surprised if none of it happens. After Jon's death, there is a bit of a power vacuum at Castle Black, and in the absence of a Lord Commander, any Starks or King Stannis, Jon's body is literally put on ice in the ice cells with the other dead Night's Watchmen. Meanwhile, his spirit or soul flees to take up home in Ghost. Incidentally, I would love a POV chapter for Jon inside Ghost, but I suspect George R. R. Martin won't go with that. Instead, we'll probably see this part of the story through Melisandre's eyes. It's probably part of the reason why she was introduced as a POV character in A Dance with Dragons. All the other POV characters at the Wall have gone. Sometime later, Jane Poole arrives at Castle Black, and everyone thinks she is Arya Stark, and she agrees that Jon's body should be burned. Melisandre also discovers then how Stannis is snowed into that Croftus village, and it's threatening his life and his plans. She asks again to see Azor Ahai reborn in her fires, and again just sees Snow, Jon Snow. She takes matters into her own hands and burns Shireen as a sacrifice. As they have a nice bonfire going, they use this as an opportunity to burn Jon's body. Melisandre stands by the fire, begging the Lord of Light to save Azor Ahai's life, and Jon's spirit magically rushes into his defrosted body. He leaps to his feet, gasping. Perhaps they even left his sword Longclaw with him, not knowing what to do with it, and that appears in the flames as a fiery sword. The ice in the wall is salty, plus the smoke of the fire, plus the fiery sword, plus the invocations to save Azor Ahai. The imagery will be strong. Might we see Melisandre come to believe that Jon is Azor Ahai reborn, not Stannis? That Stannis was just R'hllor's way to bring her to Jon? It would make for a huge twist in the narrative at the Wall, and it will be dark and scary and divisive. He'll have been dead for a long time, and now suddenly he's back. Everyone who sees it will be affected, and it will affect who he is. What will it all mean for his character and the story going forwards? Well, we've been warned a couple of times that being inside Ghost for that long will make Jon more wolfish. This is what Hagon, Varamir's mentor, said to him. They say you forget. When the man's flesh dies, his spirit lives on inside the beast, but every day his memory fades, and the beast becomes a little less a warg, a little more a wolf, until nothing of the man is left, and only the beast remains. So we might expect Jon to emerge from all this slightly more wolfish. But what does that mean? More animalistic? More willing to follow his own lead? More pack-like with those he considers family? Probably all of those things. And that means more likely to follow his original decision to abandon the Night's Watch and try to retake Winterfell. Because unlike in the TV show, Jon hasn't waited for the technicality of dying to release him from his Night's Watch vows. He has already abandoned them just before he was killed. So Jon will be brought back by fire, having been encased in ice. He embraced his Stark heritage through skin changing, then his Targaryen heritage by returning as a Firewhite of sorts. In this story, Jon is always the balance, Stark and Targaryen, living and dead, ice and fire. His death and resurrection will just be one more beat in that inevitable character arc. But that's just what I would write. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. If you'd like to see more videos like this, diving into the world of A Song of Ice and Fire, there's a playlist appearing now on the left of your screen. Or to support this channel, thank you. There's a link to my Patreon page on the right of your screen. Thanks for watching. That's all for this time. I'll see you again soon.